Jeg tror virkelig vi har undervurdert folks sinne, sa den amerikanske ambassadøren til Danmark dagen etter at Trump hadde vunnet valget. Rufus Gifford han kom fra jobben som finansdirektør for Obama-kampanjen, og på mange måter så representerte han, da han kom til Danmark, det Amerika som vi i Norden aldri sluttet å elske. Altså det demokratiske, frie samfunnet hvor alle skal ha like muligheter. Og aldri har det danske folk vært så på fornavn med en ambassadør som de ble med Rufus. Og det hele toppet seg i kjærlighet da han fikk sin kjekke veterinærmann på Københavns rådhus. Altså intet øye var tørt i Danmark den dagen. Og hvis dere synes det høres ut som en slags såpeopera, så faktisk Rufus stjerne i sin egen reality-serie. Prisbelønt dansk reality-serie om ambassadelivet. Og en del kommentatorer i Danmark de spurte seg etter valget om det faktisk ble vanskeligere for Danmark å forstå at Trump kunne vinne på grunn av Rufus som de var blitt så glad i, som representerte noe helt annet. Uansett så har altså Rufus Gifford en bakgrunn som gir han et utrolig innblikk både i den nordiske modellen og i amerikansk samfunnsliv og politikk. And one of the reasons why he is running for Congress this year is because he wants to fix what he calls one of the greatest challenges America faces at the moment, the lack of trust between the people and its government. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rufus Gifford.
God morgen, alle sammen. Ja. Tak fordi jeg måtte komme. Det dejligt at være tilbage i Oslo. Now, I understand that that's Danish, but I couldn't possibly learn 2 Scandinavian languages, and not even Danes can really understand me. So what I tried to say is, thanks so much for having me, and it's really, really lovely to be back in Oslo. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really, really honored and grateful to be able to speak to your conference here today, and to honestly address one of those issues, as I understood part of what the introduction was all about, to address this issue that is something I talk about every single day now, which is the deficit of trust that exists in our society. So I'm very, very honored to do it. But first, a couple of words about Norway. First of all, you're kind of the talk of the world right now in so many different ways. Not only did you dominate the Olympics, but you seem to be the only country in the world other than Russia that Donald Trump actually likes. So that's a feat. I do not know how you did that, but I really don't. But I don't know that, I'm not sure that anyone actually broke it to Donald Trump what you pay in taxes. But he still seems to like you, which is fascinating. We also have something in common, which are, I believe, politicians who should probably spend a little bit of less time on social media. But so yeah. So enough about that. I oftentimes, I know it's a particularly politically dramatic day here in Oslo and here in Norway. I still would like to trade places with you every single day. I'm certain overnight we've fired 3 or 4 more cabinet secretaries in Washington. So I still would like to see, I'm happy to hear that everything seems to have resolved itself in this morning. Here we go. So I'm going to start to talk a little bit about trust and why this is such a Scandinavian style of trust is such an important part of what I've been working on over the course of the last few years. So to tell you a little bit about my story, I know you heard this. I worked for President Obama for 10 years. I started working for him in January 2007. I worked on both campaigns, and after we won re-election, you have one of those moments that this, at the time, 38-year-old political staffer never dreamed would happen to him. He asked me to be an ambassador. Now, I had absolutely no diplomatic experience. I was a young 38-year-old who really had spent most of my time as a political fundraiser. And he thought I'd do a pretty good job as ambassador, but I had to prove it to people. Like everything else I did in my life, I wanted to jump in with all of my head and all of my heart. So what did I do? I talked to everybody I possibly could about diplomacy. I talked to everybody I possibly could about Denmark. I met with the 3 previous ambassadors to Denmark, both the Obama appointee and the 2 Bush administration appointees before them. And they would say the same thing. And you would hear the same thing if your ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Norway would hear, which is Denmark is a great partner. They've stood side by side on us on issue after issue for the last several years. The partnership is as good as it gets. That was never good enough for me. I needed to dive a little deeper. I needed to understand a good bit more about what made these societies work. Scandinavia, Americans have sort of this broad, sort of stereotypical definition of what it means to be Scandinavian. And it really doesn't have anything to do with trust specifically. It has to do with, Viking lore and renewable energy and beautiful people and sort of socialist societies that are very kind of politically polarizing in the United States. You have the left who absolutely loves it, and you have the right who thinks it's terrible, and there's never really a comprehensive debate about this. So I was obsessed in sort of drilling down and understanding a little bit more about what made Scandinavian societies work, what made Scandinavian societies function the way you did, both kind of as societies, but also as businesses, and how it all wove together. So what did I do? In the first 6 months of my ambassadorship, I'd spend lots and lots of time traveling the country and understanding, going to rooms that were, frankly, a lot smaller than this, and sitting down with the community and have conversations with folks. I learn about these concepts that, they're Danish in their nature from my perspective, but I know they're Norwegian as well. Concepts like hygge, concepts like jantelov, understanding jantelov is a funny thing because I bet you have jantelov too, right? It's like a Scandinavian thing. Jantelov in a room like this would probably be very unpopular. And as an ambassador, they always tell you, make sure you attack jantelov. The jantelov doesn't make you competitive in the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there is truth to that. I actually think jantelov is not helpful from a business standpoint. It isn't, because it doesn't allow you to sell yourselves internationally in a way that benefits you, and I think that's true. I think jantelov in a corporate environment is not particularly effective. That being said, personal jantelov, meaning humility, you can't strip from Scandinavian culture. It's actually one of the things that makes you who you are. And frankly, I say this too, if the United States had a bit more jantelov, we never would have elected Donald Trump president of the United States. He is the walking antithesis of jantelov. He puts his last name on stakes. You would never see that here. But then I started to dig a little deeper. When you start to understand these concepts, you understand just how much trust impacts every element of society. Just you have the human side of this. You have the sort of stereotypes that, Danes will leave their baby strollers outside of coffee shops and go inside and have a cup of coffee for a half an hour and not let anyone, and never really check on their babies. Now, that's very, very strange as an American. We would never do that. I would be with friends who would have their young children and they playing outside in the summer. And, I would be more worried about their children than they were. They would say they'll come back. This is part of this whole concept of sort of societal trust, which I found to be fascinating and so different from American. But then you sort of dig a little deeper, because that's kind of inherent this whole concept is inherent in what makes Scandinavian society click. This idea that you are willing to pay, you are willing to invest an enormous percentage of your taxes in order to the government, and of course you'll complain about it. I'm sure there are lots of people in this room who think their taxes are too high. But the fact is, you fundamentally trust government, which as an American is so sort of out there to me. People ask me in Denmark over and over again what the biggest difference between the United States and Denmark is. And I think the same should be true between the United States and Norway. 100%, it is the whole concept of trust in government. Scandinavian society, the way I see it, trusts government to make their lives better somehow. Yes, you complain about it on the margins a bit here and there, but you fundamentally trust government to make your lives a bit better. Americans live by the big old famous quote from Ronald Reagan. If you all know this, it's what are the 7 scariest words in the English language? And he said it was, "Hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help." That is how the United States, this is Ronald Reagan, who is, even though I may politically disagree with him, is one of the most popular presidents in American history. So where do we go from here? So I'm talking a little bit about trust in Danish culture, but the thing about it is this, is that as an outsider in Scandinavian culture, you're inherently distrusted. And this was fascinating to me. So before I got to Denmark, I had lots of former ambassadors. I mentioned I talked to the 3 previous ambassadors. And I asked them sort of, how would I fit in Danish society? And they said, you will be inherently distrusted until you earn that trust. And I said, well, that's kind of an interesting project. How do I do that? So I did. What I did is I went to every single dinner I possibly could. I sang the songs. You guys sing all the time, which is fascinating. I drank the snaps. I danced around the Christmas tree, and I actually loved this. And I really inserted myself in Danish society. But there was still an enormous amount of distrust of me and the institution I represented. And I think for good reason. I represented the largest and least sexy bureaucracy in the world. And there was something, people didn't fundamentally understand what I did. People didn't understand what my role in their country was. Now, I think, frankly, everybody in this room might understand the role of an ambassador. But when you get out into the public, they didn't. So what I wanted to do is actually tear down the walls and build trust between people and the institution. Now, so what did I do? So I would go in these rooms and I'd ask people, so what do you think an ambassador does? And they would say it was hilarious. They would give me the funniest answers. They would say, well, we think you play a lot of golf. We think you go to a lot of cocktail parties. And in the middle of the day, you go to that hideous, scary building behind the barbed wire, the embassy in downtown Copenhagen, and you tap our phone lines. That's what they thought we did. And so, and the work that I could see that we were doing, when we were great trading partners, we were investing in political and cultural exchange, we were great military partners, and none of this anybody knew about. So I know that this was mentioned. I can't possibly ever get beyond the sort of reality show brand thing. But the truth is, the point of the television show was to tear down the walls and actually show people the work that we were doing. To actually explain to average people who couldn't have cared less historically what an ambassador did, was to actually show them the work. Because we spent way too much time preaching to the choir. And if you are preaching to the choir, you can't build trust the way that we wanted to build trust. The funny part about this crazy little experiment of this television show is that we were onto something, apparently. I made this show, so DR3, one of the 300 channels on Danish cable, approached us right after I arrived and said, can we follow you around for a few months? And I said, sure. We had never done this before, so it was super risky, but it seemed to be something that made sense for us to do. I thought 5,000 people would watch this thing, and it became this weird cult hit. And then DR sold it to Norway, as it's been on your TV. DR sold it to Sweden. It's been on their TV. And then DR sold it to Netflix. So it's on TV in the United States and Canada and the UK and Ireland and Australia and New Zealand and a few other countries in Europe. Now, why do I say this? Because I actually think people in my position need to be doing more of this. Now, sure, I'll get criticized by traditional diplomatic traditionalists, and that's fine. I frankly think that's okay. Because I still get approached, if I walk down the street in Copenhagen, I still get approached by young people who say to me, for the first time in my life, you made me want to be a public servant. Because I understood what an ambassador did for the first time, and that matters. And so I just think we need to, those of us who are in positions like mine, especially Americans, need to tear down the walls I need to explain to people. We live in an era of transparency. I think every single person knows that. And to explain to people what we do. So this television show was an attempt to do everything I possibly could to build trust between people and institutions. Now, moving forward, I want to talk a little bit about partnerships. And then I want to finish by talking, of course, everybody. I can't sit here in front of a Norwegian audience and not talk a little bit about the political climate in the United States today. And ultimately, I know this will be crazy, I'm going to try to leave you with more hope than you have. Because I want to describe to you what I'm seeing and hearing on the ground. And I'm going to do it without even spending a moment defending the Trump administration, because I don't know how to do that. But I do know how to defend the United States of America and to understand our people and what is actually happening and what to expect as far as the political future. Now, partnerships. I know this is largely a private sector audience here today. And I know you're probably hearing a lot about sort of the protectionist policies that are coming to bear in the United States federally right now. Protectionism that we haven't seen in my lifetime, not in generations. Now, I would say this. Despite the fact that I do think these policies, frankly, fundamentally undermine everything that actually made America great, I want you to don't lose faith in the United States. And I want you to continue to look at us, and I want you to continue to invest. When you think about the United States, you can't just think, you know this, I hope, but I think you should. You can't just think federally. The United States is so much bigger than that. And you need to think sort of locally, you need to think state by state, you need to think city by city. Because if you, maybe the lack of trust that exists on the federal level in the United States still exists on the state level. And I can tell you right now that the work that I am trying to do is to bring as much as I possibly can to bring Scandinavian-style, mostly renewable energy infrastructure to my part of the country, which is Massachusetts, which is where I live, which is in so many ways very culturally in sync with this part of the world. So please don't, I have to say it, that the partnership will continue to exist and continue to look, so please keep looking at us for all of the chatter that you hear on the federal level, that the United States is very very much open for business. So please, thank you. So when I'm going to tell you in closing, I have about 9 minutes left, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I am in this, meaning why I decided to take an enormous leap, which I never anticipated doing. I want you to know that, to run for Congress in 2018. I want to tell you why. And it goes back to November 9th of 2016. That's the day after Trump won. So as we all know, we're up in the middle of the night. It's 4 o'clock in the morning or so before anybody knows what's happening. And the really fun part for me is that I am hosting a breakfast for 700 people, Americans and Danes, where I'm going to explain to everybody what's happened in the country. And I had my Churchill quotes planned. Churchill has a great quote that says, "Americans always make the right decision after we've exhausted all other options." I had spent the last 6 months touring Denmark. Talking about American democracy and actually talking about what has happened in Europe, influencing our political narrative. If you all know who Steve Bannon is a student of far-right European-style politics. Steve Bannon was one of Donald Trump's closest advisors. And so when I would go into Danish audience, I would talk about the rise of far-right nationalism, the rise of xenophobia, the rise of protectionism in the United States as it related to the rise of similar political movements in Europe. And I would go to these rooms and I'd say, but we are going to reject it. We are going to go from the first African-American president to the first woman president. And the debate that I've had, the conversation that I've had with you, Denmark, over the course of the last 4 years on everything from climate change to healthcare to equality to alliances was going to continue. And I go downstairs and I go into that room of 700 people. I put on my tie, put myself together, my relatively devastated self together, put myself together, and look into that room of all friends of the United States, every single one of them, Danes and Americans. I saw nothing but fear on the faces. And I realized that conversation that I had been having for the last 4 years, that I could not fundamentally have right now. That I had talked about how the United States was I would get hit in these rooms, we were the great polluter, we were the only country in the world that didn't ratify Kyoto. And I, for 4 years, was talking about, yes, that is true, but we are tripling wind energy production under Obama. We are multiplying by a factor of 20 solar energy production under Obama. And we are, for the first time in global history, negotiating a global pact which acknowledges climate change as the crisis that it is, and every single country in the world is stepping up to do something about it. Same thing on health care. Same thing on equality. Same thing on issues involving alliances, all of it. And I realized that the trust that I had built between myself and Danish society was somewhat at risk, frankly. So it was important for me to go, in that moment, I realized it was important for me to go back home, throw my hat in the ring, and try to build trust back, and try to take what I had learned about Scandinavian-style trust and bring it home. Now, what does that mean? In my campaign, my little campaign, my congressional district of 750,000 people, which I know sounds like quite large by Scandinavian standards, but still, what does that mean? For me, it's human. And that's what this society is all about. It's about community. And that's what this society is all about. I believe what is tearing, in some ways politically tearing American society apart is this idea of war on community. That we have a president who talks about the fact that we can't trust the media. We can't trust law enforcement. We can't trust the institutions. And that just simply makes it worse. How do we build it back? We build it back person to person. So what I am trying to do, and what I hope to do before my election in November, is actually use one example, something that people in this room, whether you know it or not, taught me a lot about, is that I will try to build it back, person to person, to build trust, house to house, street to street, neighborhood to neighborhood, city to city. Because I think it's critically important for the health of the country. And in my last couple of minutes, I will just say this. You hear a lot. I've focused even in my little remarks here about some of the challenges that we see in the United States. Whether it's the Russia investigation or the tweets or the firing of various cabinet secretaries via Twitter, all of which is, let's say, has presented a bit of chaos on the American side. But I just want to leave you here with, as I said earlier, I need to leave you with a tremendous amount of hope. Because I want you to know that Americans are fired up. As I travel around the country right now and have conversations with people, I see people engaged like I have never seen before in my lifetime. You have more people running for office in the United States than we have seen in generations. More young people, more diverse populations, more women, all stepping up and running for office because they do not believe that the values that are coming out of Washington are true American values. The nonprofit communities, whether it is climate organizations, women's organizations, LGBT organizations, immigration organizations are all raising more money than they've ever raised before in their history. And you see young people, which is so important for the United States, coming out and participating in our society for the first time, I would say, in generations, since Vietnam. Now, you see people marching on immigration, on women's issues. We're going to have a big march this coming Sunday, and I can tell you I'll be marching right alongside of them with a whole group of 17-year-olds who organized a national movement based on gun violence in the country. And they are registering people to vote, and they are signing up. That, in my mind, is going to be the future of American democracy. Keep an eye out for us. We may have had a little blip a couple of years ago, but I promise you, the United States will come back, and will come back stronger than ever because of the people, who truly, truly, truly represent the best of our country. And those people are running, those people are voting, and those people are participating, perhaps for the first time in a very, very long time. And that is a great thing. So I thank you, everybody. I thank you so, so much for hearing me out this morning and for giving me an opportunity to actually thank you, and to thank the folks throughout this region of the world who have taught me so much. And I can tell you this, I keep it very, very close to my heart, and I'll bring it with me for the rest of my life. So thank you. Thanks for hearing me out today. Thanks for having me. And good Polska.